The whisper started before the grave was even filled. It was faint at first, like wind brushing against stone, but unmistakable. Thomas Rowe stood alone in Ashvale Cemetery as the first snow of December began to fall. A light dusting coated the tops of the old tombstones, turning them into hunched, white-covered shapes like grieving statues. The priest, a man too frail to lift the Bible properly, finished reading the final words over Daniel's grave and gave Thomas a half-hearted nod before retreating to his car without another word. Thomas didn't move. 23 years had passed since he last stood in Ashvale, and yet in that moment he felt as though he'd never left. The same bitter wind sliced through the forest beyond the fence. The same silence hung thick in the air, a silence so unnatural it made his ears ring. Time had moved on, but this place hadn't. It was frozen, like something holding its breath. The whisper came again, this time closer, a single word. "Thomas!" He spun around. Nothing, just the gravestones, just the skeletal trees, just the creeping fog that rolled in from the low hills beyond the town. But the sound, that voice, had come from no more than a few feet behind him. He told himself it was exhaustion, jet lag, stress. Daniel's death had been sudden, no explanation. The coroner wrote cardiac arrest on the report, but Thomas knew better. His brother was strong, sober, disciplined. Something had taken him, something no one wanted to talk about. He was the last of the Rowe family now. His mother, locked away in a facility 2 hours south of town, hadn't spoken since their father's funeral. His father, well, that was another grave in the same cemetery, though Thomas hadn't gone near it. Not yet. The figure appeared just as he turned to leave. A woman, standing at the far edge of the cemetery, near the woods, pale, hair long and black, dripping wet despite the snow. Her dress, torn and faded, clung to her thin frame like frost on glass. She didn't move, didn't blink, just stared. Thomas took one step forward. She vanished. He didn't sleep that night. Back at the old row house, the wind howled through cracked window panes and the floorboards moaned with every shift of the storm outside. The house smelled like damp wood and mildew. No heat, no power. Daniel's room was still locked. The padlock was rusted, deep red with age, fixed to the outside of the door, as if meant to keep someone in. Thomas hadn't remembered that, but then again, Daniel had lived here alone for over 10 years after their mother was institutionalized. He found a key tucked behind a loose panel in the hallway, a habit their father used to have, hiding things in the walls, always afraid someone would come for them, always watching. He unlocked the door. The air inside was bitterly cold, colder than the rest of the house. The window was boarded shut, nailed from the inside. Furniture was overturned. Scratches lined the walls, deep grooves, as if someone had used metal or bone to claw through plaster and wood. At the center of the room sat a circle of melted candles and ash. Photographs had been nailed to the wall, dozens of them, all of the same woman. The woman from the cemetery. Some were old, black and white, others more recent, printed on cheap paper smeared with what looked like blood. One photo had been torn and stitched together with thread, showing her standing beside Daniel. Thomas stumbled back. His breath came fast, ragged. He tried to speak, to curse, to scream, but the words caught in his throat. The window behind the boards let out a single, deafening bang. He turned, slowly, mechanically, and saw a face through the gap in the wood, eyes wide, smiling, teeth cracked and wet with rot. The whisper came again. "She never left." Thomas didn't remember getting out of the room. His next memory was standing in the kitchen, hands trembling, the metallic taste of panic thick in his mouth. Outside, the wind shrieked like something wounded, and the trees bent under its weight as if they wanted to reach for the house and tear it apart. He found a flashlight in one of the drawers. Dead batteries. He used his phone's weak glow to navigate back up the stairs, but something had changed. The hallway was darker than before. Too dark. The light from his screen barely reached past his feet. The walls seemed to pulse, breathing slowly, in and out, like the house itself had come alive. He stopped in front of his old room. The door was open. Inside, the bed was untouched. The desk still held a cracked snow globe he had as a child, but the mirror, the tall, dusty mirror that once stood in the corner, was shattered, and each shard had been rearranged on the floor into a strange, spiraling symbol. His phone buzzed in his hand. One new message, unknown number again. "You opened the door." He dropped the phone, and then he heard footsteps, not his own, upstairs, in Daniel's room, slow, deliberate. He wanted to run. Every part of him screamed for it. But instead, he found himself moving, drawn up the stairs as if pulled by invisible strings. The hallway now smelled like burnt flesh and rotting flowers. The door to Daniel's room was wide open. The photographs were gone. The walls were clean, as if they had never been scratched, never been desecrated. The candles had melted completely into the floor, leaving behind oily black stains in a perfect ring. At the center of it all, something new, a small wooden box. It looked handmade, old, no hinges, just a lid that slid open with a faint creak. Inside, a clump of wet hair, a locket, and a human tooth, still stained at the root. Thomas dropped it, backing away until he hit the wall. And then the lights flickered. Not the house lights. They were long dead, but something behind him, something inside the mirror on the opposite wall. Even though it was shattered, he saw a reflection, not of the room, of the cemetery. A grave, freshly dug, a stone he hadn't noticed before. It bore his name. He stumbled forward. The image vanished. In the silence, something behind him whispered, inches from his ear. "You were supposed to stay buried." He turned. Nothing, just air, cold and dead. That night, Thomas didn't sleep. He sat in the living room wrapped in his coat, flashlight off to save battery, watching the shadows crawl along the walls. He listened. To breathing that wasn't his, to footsteps overhead when no one should be there. And at exactly 3:14 in the morning, he heard the front door creak open. Not all the way, just a crack. Enough for the snow to blow in, enough for her to enter. The door creaked again. Thomas held his breath, frozen in the darkness. The snow swirled in through the crack, melting on the wooden floor, and with it came a smell, damp soil, rust, and something older, something wrong. The kind of scent that doesn't just fill your nose but gets under your skin. He forced himself to stand. The cold bit into his bones, but it was nothing compared to the dread spreading through his chest. He reached the door. It was open no more than a few centimeters, but beyond it, the world was pitch black. Not the usual dark of night. This was deeper, thicker, like the darkness itself had substance. He leaned in slightly, trying to see, and the door slammed shut with a force that rattled the entire house. He jumped back, nearly slipping on the wet floor. Heart hammering, he pressed his back to the wall, waiting for something, anything. Silence, but not the kind he remembered. This was alive. Something moved upstairs. No, not footsteps. A dragging sound, something heavy sliding across the floor, slow, deliberate, like claws across old wood. He moved quietly, reaching for the fireplace poker, the heaviest thing he could find. His hands shook around the cold iron as he made his way back up the stairs, avoiding the boards he knew would creak. His breath fogged the air. Every step he took felt like it would be his last. The hallway stretched longer than it should have. Each door he passed seemed warped, wrong, wider, taller, as if the house was reshaping itself. At the end of the hall, Daniel's room was open again. Inside, the box was gone. But the mirror had changed. It was whole, not broken. Its frame was covered in frost, and the surface rippled like water. Thomas stepped closer, unable to stop himself. And there, reflected in the mirror, was the woman, standing right behind him. He spun, swinging the poker wildly, but hit nothing. The room was empty. The mirror, however, still showed her. Now she was closer. Her eyes were pale, almost white, her mouth open in a frozen scream, her skin gray-blue like something drowned. And then, without warning, she reached through the mirror. A hand, wet, cold, rotting, burst from the glass and grabbed his wrist. Thomas screamed, falling back, the poker clattering to the floor. He kicked at the mirror, breaking it into pieces again, the hand vanishing as the shards exploded outward. He crawled back, hands bleeding from the glass, heart pounding. In the corner of the room, something moved. He aimed the flashlight. Its weak beam fell on the wall, now covered again in photographs. But this time, they were all of him. Sleeping, standing, at the funeral, in this house. One photo, pinned dead center, showed him lying in a grave. Half buried, eyes wide open. He staggered to his feet and ran, down the stairs, out the front door, into the snow without a coat or shoes. He didn't stop until he reached the cemetery. Ashvale's fog was thicker now, the tombstones barely visible, but he found it, the grave. The new one, the one with his name. Thomas Rowe, born October 12, 1987, died December 4th, 2024. The dirt was freshly turned, the stone gleamed, his knees buckled. Then, behind him, the unmistakable sound of breathing, and a voice that chilled his soul. "You shouldn't have come back, Thomas." Thomas turned slowly. Through the thick veil of fog, the shape emerged, not rushing him, not attacking, just approaching. Each step was deliberate, measured, as though whoever, whatever it was, had no reason to hurry, because it already knew he wouldn't escape. The figure stopped a few meters from the grave. The fog shifted just enough for Thomas to see the long coat, the sunken face, the black eyes like two pits scraped into a corpse's skull. It was Daniel, but not as he remembered him. His skin had the hue of something long buried, stretched taut across sharp cheekbones. His lips were torn, exposing cracked teeth, and his hands, his fingers, were dark, stiff, bloated at the joints. His voice, however, was unchanged, still calm, still low. "You let her out," Daniel said. Thomas tried to speak, but his throat was too dry. His mind fought to make sense of what he was seeing. "I locked the door for a reason. I warned you." Daniel's dead eyes flicked toward the town. "But you never listened, just like Dad." Thomas stepped back. The grave was behind him now, and for a moment he felt like it might open beneath his feet. What is she?" he managed to ask, his voice hoarse. Daniel tilted his head. "She was here before Ashvale, before any of us. She lives under the roots, the soil. She hears the names we speak aloud, and the ones we whisper in our sleep. She feeds on the grief we bury and the guilt we deny, and now she has yours." Thomas shook his head. "No, this is insane. You still think this is about you," Daniel said with a small, broken smile. "You don't get it. We're part of her now, all of us. That house, that grave, the mirror, they're not haunted. We are." A gust of wind howled across the cemetery, carrying the distant sound of weeping, soft and echoing, as if coming from beneath the ground. "She's awake again, Thomas," Daniel said, stepping forward. "And she doesn't want you to run. She wants you to remember." The earth trembled slightly under their feet. From the nearby graves, Thomas began to hear movement, faint muffled thuds, nails on wood, then splintering, then silence. Daniel turned his head slowly. "I can hold her off, for a while," he said. "But you need to finish what she started. Go to the chapel, the old one. She's waiting." "Why me?" Daniel gave a hollow laugh. "Because you buried her, 23 years ago. You were just a kid, but you knew, and you lied. You all did." Thomas staggered back, mind spinning. "I don't remember." "You will," Daniel said, then reached into the inside of his coat and tossed something into the snow at Thomas's feet. It was the locket, the same one from the box in Daniel's room. Thomas picked it up. The back was engraved with a name. Anna Rowe, his mother. No, she's alive. Daniel's eyes darkened. "Parts of her are. The rest belongs to her now." A scream tore through the sky. Not human, not animal. Something else. something too big to see, too old to name. The fog around them pulsed as if it had a heartbeat. Daniel stepped back, his body twitching like a marionette with tangled strings. "Go!" Thomas turned and ran. The chapel was less than 2 kilometers through the woods, but every step through that forest felt like moving deeper into a dream he couldn't wake from. The trees bent unnaturally overhead. Roots jutted out like fingers grabbing at his ankles. The snow was gone now, replaced by damp earth and rotting leaves. He reached the chapel just before dawn. Its doors were open, no lights, no sounds, and inside, something was waiting. The chapel was dead. Thomas stepped inside, feeling the air thicken around him like water. No wind reached this place. No sound dared cross its threshold. The only thing that greeted him was a stale warmth, like breath trapped underground for centuries. The interior had been gutted long ago. Pews were scattered in broken piles. The crucifix above the altar had rotted into a misshapen shadow. The stained glass windows were blackened with soot. But there was something else, something that wasn't supposed to be there. A staircase behind the altar, narrow, stone, leading down into darkness. He didn't hesitate. Every instinct screamed at him to run, but he knew it was too late for that. Whatever was happening, whatever had begun when he came back to Ashvale, it wouldn't stop unless he finished it. He descended slowly. The walls of the staircase were carved with symbols, old ones, not religious, not tribal, primal. Shapes that looked like they had been burned in with blood and bone. The air grew colder the deeper he went. And then finally, he reached the bottom. A single room, a crypt or what was left of it, broken statues, a floor littered with rotting wood and fragments of coffins. At the far end, a stone platform, like an altar but darker, older, covered in dried vines and ash, and behind it the wall was breathing. He saw it, slow, deliberate movement. Inhale, exhale. The surface pulsed like flesh underwater. Then he heard her. Not the whisper, not the wind, a voice, clear, soft, familiar. "Tommy!" He froze. No one had called him that since he was a boy. The voice came again. "You remember now, don't you?" He didn't answer, but the memory crashed into him like a wave breaking a dam. Ashvale, the lake behind their house, his sister Anna just 8 years old. She was always following him, always asking questions. That day, the ice had cracked. He hadn't meant to leave her, but he was afraid. Afraid of what his parents would do, afraid they would blame him. And so he ran. And they buried an empty coffin. He told himself the lake took her, but the lake only hides, it doesn't take. He dropped to his knees, hand gripping the cold, damp floor as if he could anchor himself to reality. But the voice continued. "I waited. I called. You never came back for me." He raised his head, and she was there, standing just beyond the altar, her dress soaked, hanging from her thin frame like it had grown from her skin. Her face was still Anna's, but twisted, hollowed. Her eyes were bottomless. Her mouth stretched unnaturally wide. Her skin moved like it was full of worms, but it was Anna. Part of her, at least. And something else, something far older than the lake, something that wore grief like a mask and fed on silence. Thomas stumbled backward. Anna moved forward. "You buried me in a lie." The breathing wall behind her began to crack. From it emerged hands, dozens of them. Children's hands, women's, some broken, some burned, all clawing for something they could never reach. "We all drowned in your silence," she whispered. "Now it's your turn." The floor beneath him split open. Cold water surged up through the cracks, rising fast. The room tilted, twisted. The breathing wall split apart with a deafening wail, revealing a massive cavity behind it. Not a room, but a tunnel that led down into darkness and deeper water. She stepped toward him again, no longer walking, gliding. Thomas turned and fled up the stairs, slipping on the wet stone, his knees bleeding, hands scraping at the carvings for balance. The staircase was longer now, impossibly long. The chapel above was gone. Only the sound of water rising behind him and the voice. now deeper, distorted, echoing from every wall. "You brought this home, Thomas. Now you drown with us." Thomas wasn't inside the mirror. He was the mirror, or something close to it. He hovered in a place without gravity, without air, surrounded by fragments of himself. Not metaphorical pieces, but literal shards, images of his face twisted by fear, his hands covered in dirt, his voice begging forgiveness in infinite fractured echoes. Each shard showed a different moment, a different loop. In one, he was still a teenager, soaking wet, staring at the edge of the lake, whispering, "I didn't mean to." In another, he was older, digging in the woods. And in another, far worse, he was lying in the coffin, eyes open, smiling. The reflections began to spin, faster, a whirlpool of timelines, choices, and buried truths. He screamed, but no sound came. The silence ate it whole. Then a figure emerged from the chaos. The woman. The thing that wore Anna's skin. But she had grown, taller, wider. Her limbs now jointless, stretching like wet branches. Her face flickered constantly between the people he loved. Daniel, his mother, Anna, himself, and others he didn't recognize. Strangers, children, maybe past victims. She hovered in front of him, her head tilting with a sickening creak. "You finally see it!" Her voice echoed in all directions at once. "You are not the first. You are not the last. You are only a vessel. The guilt is eternal, and I am the echo it leaves behind." Thomas floated backward, trying to resist her pull, but she reached forward, not with her hands, but with her memory. She projected it into him, and suddenly, he was not Thomas anymore. He was his father, 30 years earlier. He stood in this same house clutching something in his arms, a bundle, wet and cold, a child, his own daughter, Anna. She was alive, but she wasn't herself. She had been pulled from the lake, yes, but she brought something back with her. She screamed in voices not her own, spoke words no child should know, and when she looked at him, his blood turned to ice. He buried her that same night, and told everyone she had drowned, told Thomas she was gone. But the thing beneath the water had never left. Thomas collapsed back into himself with a cry as the truth ripped through every lie he'd lived with. His father wasn't just paranoid. He wasn't just grieving. He had tried to stop it. And now, Thomas had undone it all. "I tried to warn you," came Daniel's voice again, softer this time, coming from the mirror shard still floating around him. "I held her back. I locked the door. But guilt always finds a way in." The figure reached for Thomas again. "Let go," she whispered. "Sink." He felt the pull again, the same draw that brought him back to Ashvale. The loop, the lie, the endless, devouring remorse. But now, for the first time, he resisted. He screamed, not in fear but in defiance, and the shards around him shattered. The mirror exploded outward in a flash of white, and Thomas opened his eyes. Lying in the open grave, back in the cemetery, snow falling, sky gray, and beside the headstone with his name, the coffin lid was open, waiting. The snow was falling harder now. Thick, silent flakes landed on Thomas's eyelashes as he stared up at the sky. He was lying in the grave again, the cold earth beneath him wet and unyielding. The headstone above still bore his name. The coffin beside him, half buried in the mud, sat wide open, dark, yawning, as if breathing in reverse. He sat up slowly. The world around him was still. Too still. Ashvale Cemetery stretched in every direction, but the tombstones no longer looked like stone. They looked soft, like shapes that had forgotten their purpose. Some leaned, others pulsed faintly, as if something beneath them was trying to escape. Thomas climbed out of the grave. The whisper was gone. Not silent, just absent, like the eye of a storm. He turned toward the forest. At its edge stood a figure. Daniel. But not the corpse-like version from before. This was Daniel as Thomas remembered him, quiet, steady, tired but grounded. His brother. Thomas walked toward him, unsure whether he was real, whether any of this was real. "You broke it," Daniel said. Thomas shook his head. No, I remembered. Daniel looked at the grave. She's still here. That thing. It doesn't die. It waits. It feeds. It finds another. I know, Thomas said, but I saw what Dad did, what we all tried to forget. Daniel nodded. Memory is a prison if you leave the door open. Then he smiled, just briefly, sadly, and began to fade. His last words barely reached Thomas's ears. Don't let her name be spoken again. Then he was gone. The woods behind him stirred. The air changed. Something moved between the trees, slow, wet, heavy. She was not done. Thomas ran. Through the woods, through the snow, through the dying breath of Ashvale. He reached the old house just as the last light of day broke through the clouds, a brief golden shimmer that struck the upper window and seemed to burn through the filth. He entered. The house was empty. The symbols on the walls were gone. The mirror in the hall cracked once, and then turned black. No reflections. He made his way upstairs back to Daniel's room. The door was still open. Inside, the floor was clean. The ashes gone. The photographs vanished. Only the locket remained, resting in the center of the room. Thomas picked it up. The back still read Anna Rowe, but now there was something new etched below it. A question. Will you bury the truth? Thomas stood there for a long time. He walked outside, into the clearing where the lake once stood, now frozen over, covered in fresh snow. He held the locket tightly in his fist. Then, without a word, he hurled it into the center of the lake, and turned his back on it forever. Ashvale didn't resist. The wind stopped. The trees stood still, and beneath the ice something ancient stirred, not with anger but with acknowledgement. Not peace, but silence. Thomas got into his car, hands still shaking, and drove away from Ashvale without looking back. And though the road twisted behind him, though the sky darkened once more, though whispers tried to form in the corners of his mind, he never spoke her name again, not once, not even in dreams.